What's up guys, it's Will back again, and today's review is Cars 3. Cars 3 is an animated comedy adventure film that was directed by Brian Fee and is a sequel to the highly disappointing 2011 Pixar film Cars 2. Okay, so Cars 3 takes place not long after the events of Cars 2, where Lightning McQueen is back at it again, except this time McQueen is a racer in decline. He's no longer the fastest racer in the game anymore. He finds himself being passed by younger and faster rookies who all make McQueen question whether he has what it takes to win anymore. And aging McQueen begins training for potentially his final race, where he hopes to defeat the young hotshot Jackson Storm and get his career back on track. And the rest of the film is spent watching Lightning McQueen attempt to search deep within himself and recapture his mojo to become the fastest racer he's ever been. So let me start off by saying that my opinion of the Cars films are mostly pretty standard. I actually enjoyed Cars 1 overall. I didn't love it, but I had a good time with it. Absolutely hated Cars 2. It's a complete and utter disaster and not worth your time, so needless to say, my expectations for Cars 3 were somewhere in between. And while Cars 3 is certainly not a great experience, I'd say that it's way more similar narratively and quality-wise to Cars 1 than it is to Cars 2, which is a great thing. While I'd still take Cars 1 over Cars 3, the two are very similar in my eyes. They both start off a little bumpy and then slowly pick up the pace and quality level until the climax, when they deliver you an exciting, emotional, and satisfying resolution to the primary conflict. I think Cars 3 doesn't have quite as much emotion as the first installment, but I think that the climax does a really good job of making the long journey you went on mostly feel worthwhile. However, there is a route this film elects to take in the final 20 minutes or so that I think is going to be a pretty divisive one. It's sort of a sharp left turn, and it's satisfying in an unusual way. But I mean, Cars 1 did something fairly similar, and that worked for most people, so who knows, it may work for him again. For me personally, I enjoyed it because it added a touch of realism to a film and a franchise that can occasionally get too silly and predictable. I mean, they're talking cars, so consider that when I say it adds realism, as much realism as it can add to talking cars. But I will say that this Cars film tackles a number of different topics that I think will really resonate with a lot of people, like accepting change, finding your identity, and not accepting others' labels being put on you. These sort of topics are really the core of this film, and I think while the commentary on these topics isn't always entertaining and super well fleshed out, it is during the most crucial parts of the film, which seems to kind of be what Cars does as a franchise. Cars 3 is sort of the middle ground between Cars 1 and Cars 2. Cars 1 was relatively reined in and was all about McQueen learning humility, being humble, and then putting those lessons to use in a race. Cars 2 was about car spies and boat magnets and just nonsense, and Cars 3 is the most grounded of the Cars films. It's about McQueen searching deep within himself and finding out what makes him a great racer and a great person outside of his racing speeds. And I think the fact that Pixar decided to rein this one in a little bit was actually a really good choice, because this allows the story to feel much more cohesive. There's one big issue, and that's McQueen's crisis of confidence, and that's basically it. You, the viewer, can focus your entire efforts on McQueen's training and introspective journey, and you're not distracted by all the other overly silly nonsense. But I will say that there are plenty of stretches of time that just feel very uneventful, like a been there, done that sort of thing, or just scenes that aren't all that interesting. I've made this statement about other films before, but sometimes Cars 3 feels like a side quest more so than an actual main story. The story doesn't have a sense of true urgency or even a feeling of true stakes in the early parts of the film. Yeah, you know, McQueen is a veteran in decline, but I just felt very moderately invested at best until the final act. But something I will say is that Cars 3 is definitely the best looking Cars film to date and one of Pixar's best looking films, period. And when I say one of the best looking, let me clarify. I'm referring to the world and the car bodies, but not the car faces or the eyes or whatever, because those always have and continue to look sort of cartoonish. The landscapes, the environments, and the way the cars interact with the world is pretty amazing. Pixar has continually offered films that raise the bar when it comes to animation, and Cars 3 has raised that bar just a little bit higher with how great its animation is. There's something else I think I should mention here, and that's the humor. The Cars franchise has always prided itself on being a quirky, fun, and silly animated kids film franchise. I think Cars 3's humor output is very average. I think it's middle of the road, because by average, I mean it averages out to average. In other words, there's some poorly written jokes that don't land and some cleverly written jokes that do land, and when you average those two together, you get an average comedy experience. That's a lot of averages, I know. Something that Cars Cars 3 really did well was limiting your exposure to Mater, because putting Mater in the leading role for Cars 2 was a big mistake that I think Pixar learned from. Mater is much funnier in Cars 3 because his sense of humor is put to use in moderation like it should be. Cars 2 suffered from Finding Dory syndrome, meaning a supporting character that's funny in moderation is thrust into a leading role and has to carry a film and they become obnoxious. Luckily in Cars 3, characters like Mater deliver just the right amount of comedy. And just to go a little bit further while we're on the topic of characters, I think the characters are partly why this franchise is just so average, because the characters are. There's some memorable characters, sure, but none of them are really all that interesting. There's no Buzz or Woody, there's no Sully or Mike, and there's no Merida. These cars do enough, but they never quite reach the level of greatness because the characters are just sort of okay at best, which limits how much emotion you invest in them and their stories. But overall, I did enjoy Cars 3. It's not great by any means, but it's way better than Cars 2. I thought it had an exciting and satisfying climax, some fantastic animation, and some nice comedy here and there. Sadly, I also felt there were some uneventful stretches of time, the humor occasionally feels overly goofy and flat, and the characters aren't super interesting. Regardless, I'm going to give Cars 3 a 7 out of 10 and generally recommend you catch this one in theaters if you enjoyed Cars 1 or you're just looking for a solid fun time. If you're a parent, I think your kid will enjoy this movie. So did you guys see Cars 3 yet? What did you think of it? And if not, let me know why not. And also let me know your favorite Pixar film to date. I'll drop mine in a pinned comment below. That's all for now though. This is WillFoxification signing off. See you in the next review.